Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Hillary Dickman. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admission for Marketing and Communications at Colorado College, and I'm also a parent of 2 college students.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, we'll have 2 questions from a listener. One Susan will take and one Hillary will take. Now, Hillary and I are going to answer a question from Joanna, and she's a mom from the DC area, and she wants to know, do colleges like or dislike certain schools or certain regions or certain school districts? And should this factor into the colleges that students put on their list? What do you do when you look at a school, a college, and you see they haven't accepted anybody or hardly anybody from your school? Should you be factoring that in and not putting them on your list? It's a great question, and Hillary and I dive into it. Next, Susan will join me to answer a question from Mary from Atlanta, and she's got another great question. It has to do with the shortage in college housing and how that can impact the college experience. And Mary wants to know, what tips do we have for students and parents so they can make informed decisions about student housing so they know what they're walking into? And she shares some nightmare stories she's heard from some friends in her network. Then we have 2 brand new interviews for you, and they're both real deep dives. And each one went over an hour, 40 minutes. So we're slicing them into 20-minute segments. They'll both run over 5 weeks. And I did a real deep dive with Gloria and Terry Crawford. Gloria and Terry founded Initial View, the company that launched Glimpse Video that's taking off all over the country. And they're going to be discussing tips for using Glimpse Video in your student's application. And also a bunch of frequently asked questions about Glimpse we get into in that interview. Next, I interview Fabrizio Delozio, and he's the Associate Vice President and the Executive Director of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. We'll be doing a real deep dive on UTK, the University of Tennessee, for our spotlight. Friends, I am really excited about the 2 brand new interviews that you're going to hear, not only this week, but over the next 5 weeks. Really doing a deep dive on Glimpse Video with Gloria and Terry Crawford. And that's a 5-parter, and really doing a deep dive on the University of Tennessee, Knoxville for a college spotlight with Fabrizio Delozio. Now, what we typically do is divide our interviews into 20-minute segments and run them over multiple episodes. And that's what we're going to do here for the next 5 weeks. But over the years, we've had some people who find that choppy, disruptive, wish we could run it as an entire audio segment. And so our solution to that is to put everything up on yourcollegeboundkid.com. And you should know that both of these interviews were submitted 2 days ago to Stylionis, our webmaster. I fully expect they'll be up in their entirety by the time you hear this. So if you don't want to hear them in bits and pieces, 20-minute segments over the next 5 weeks, either because that grinds your gears or because you want that content and need it right now. Maybe you're working on a Glimpse Video and you don't want to wait for the whole 5 weeks to put it together, or you're very interested in UTK and you'd like to know more immediately, then go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, and the entire interview and the entire spotlight, both of them that run over an hour, 40 minutes, should be up live. Just wanted to share that with you as an FYI.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Hi, Hillary.
Hi.
So we have a great question from Joanna, and she's from the DC area. And I'm going to play the question, and then I'm going to make a comment first, and then I'll let you comment.
Sounds good.
Hi, Mark. This is Joanna, a parent from the Washington, D.C. region. I recently reviewed a resource that one of our local magazines provides, which shows what colleges students at a half dozen or so of our local high schools applied to, how many applied, how many were accepted, and how many enrolled in each college. Reviewing that resource and thinking about some things I've heard you talk about on this show, I'm wondering if you can talk specifically about whether it is true that colleges like or dislike certain high schools or even certain school districts or regions, and how a student should factor that in when deciding whether or not to put that college on their list. Among other things, I'm thinking about when you're deciding which small number of more selective colleges to include on your list, or whether to apply early decision somewhere. Does it make sense when you have a school that is a long shot in any case to cross it off your list because that school does not have a good acceptance rate for your child's high school or school district? Thanks so much.
So thanks to our listeners, I happen to know that this is Bethesda Magazine because another listener from that same area sent this to me 4 or 5 years ago. And ever since then, I've kind of followed it. And so you can look this up, but every year, September, October, Bethesda Magazine, it takes 6 schools like Walt Whitman and a bunch of other schools in that area, and it produces the sort of acceptance data and the number of applications per school. And if you're a parent, especially if you don't realize sort of how selective some schools are, it can be a little intimidating to look up and see some of the most selective schools, and they might have 258 applications in the last few years from your school, and 3 kids got in or 6 kids got in. So personally, I think sometimes things like that can be helpful because so many times people don't realize how selective these schools are. And I think sometimes it can actually help people to realize, like, it's so easy to just kind of be in your own echo chamber and not realize there's just a big world out there, but it can also obviously add to undue stress. But there's a lot to say on this one, Hillary. I want to know, take it where you want to go with it.
Yeah. Gosh, I went to that chart and looked at it, and it was really fascinating for me to look at, even though I know what a lot of this data looks like. It's, I don't know, it was just interesting to compare Colorado College to some of our peer institutions and then see how many apps some of the bigger schools are getting. It was really fascinating. I would caution against using that data to inform your college list, because I just think there is too much going on behind the scenes about why there may or may not be more admitted students from a specific high school to a specific college that you really cannot extrapolate from that data alone.
This is really important. Can you unpack some of that, Hillary?
Yeah.
What are some of the legitimate reasons why a school may not show impressive numbers that in no way, shape, or form would imply that you're dead on arrival because the school doesn't like your school?
Yeah, I don't think that there are schools that we just don't like. There may be schools that we have stronger histories with than others, but I don't ever find myself discounting a student because of the school that they go to. So I think that there are trends within schools, right? Where a school might be a fabulous school that we just aren't getting strong applications from. Like, I can think of one right now where I've looked at which apps we have in our queue from this particular school, and they're just not very strong applications. And so I know we're not getting the strongest. I know it's a really good school, and I know that for whatever reason, we have not tapped into the market of strong students from that school. And so we're probably not going to admit any students from that school this year. And it's not because they don't have strong applicants. It's because their strong applicants, for whatever reason, aren't applying to Colorado College. And that's on us, right? That's something that we need to do to be more appealing to their top students. So, like, you can't know that on the other end. When you look at those numbers, you don't know if 0 students got in because there were 0 qualified applicants, or if it's for some other reason. I have no idea what that reason would be, right? I also think that sometimes this isn't true when you're thinking about big flagships that are totally need blind, but when you're thinking about schools that meet full demonstrated need and are need aware, sometimes that can play into it too, where, like, if a school has students that tend to have more need, the bar is going to be higher often for those students to be admitted to a school than it is for students without financial need. So that can play into decisions. And so you might see schools in wealthier areas where more students are being admitted because more students can pay. And that, I know, is not a fun thing to hear, but it is a reality of how lots of highly selective schools work.
Yeah, I really appreciate your honesty in sharing that. And I loved your first example too, because that happens. Like schools can get sort of slotted as, I don't know, certain level in the general perception within the student body.
Yeah.
And that could come from a lot of different reasons. And therefore, there's a mismatch between the applicants that you're attracting and someone who's competitive. And so that's such a great example of how the data would be misleading, because you would look at it and say, well, I'm not liking what I'm seeing here at all. So then the implication is I don't think they like my school. But admission officers are professionals at assessing, what a student's going to be able to bring to their community. I can assure you, if in the situation like what Hillary said, if there was a strong applicant in that school you're referring to, that student would pop and they would stand out, and there wouldn't be any discriminatory lens they'd be looked through. In fact, and sometimes that's even more exciting.
Yes, I was just going to say that, because when you're trying to start a trend of strong students applying from a school, you might even lower the bar a little bit, because you're like, hey, I really want to get more applicants from this school the next year. And this student seems like a leader. It seems like someone who students look up to, and their grades aren't the best, but maybe if we admit them, then we can start sort of a little bit of a wave of students coming from this school. So yeah, it sometimes works a little bit in reverse.
Yeah, I was completely my experience as well. Like the places that we hadn't got anybody in, it's my third or fourth year in a row traveling, recruiting. Like I'm thinking, I want to break into the school. And especially if it's someone who I think might be a puller, might have connections, and might have good relationships. And I'm thinking, okay, I want this person coming back wearing the shirt, being the enthusiast, because all of us who've been in admissions have seen that when you break into a school, all of a sudden you can get a whole bunch more apps the next year. And the next year and the next year. It's how schools can become traditional feeders over time.
Yeah, I had a really interesting conversation with a counselor while I was traveling who said, this one student who you admitted last year, she's posting the most amazing content to her Instagram that's all about her experience at Colorado College, and all of our juniors and seniors are following her and watching it. And he was like, she is your best marketing for our school, which I think is so true. Like you want those students who are going to sort of spread the word about your school, but it sometimes takes time to find them.
I just thought of a story that kind of shows this. A student I was working with in Tennessee last year, and she really liked Loyola Chicago. And there was no history at all of, her school sending kids to there. And to make a long story short, she ended up going there. But I was talking to her once, and she's like, yeah, I've got 6 more people that are applying, and I was like, at one point I was like, you need to be on the payroll, but I mean, she single-handedly drummed up interest, for that school. I'm thinking of another student right now who was like the first student from Texas in her area to go to Mercer. And then she came super close to getting her best friend to go. And now that mom's very, very actively involved in the school, and it's drumming up interest. And so, there's always a history of how pipelines start. Like they start somewhere. They don't just drop out of nowhere, right? It starts with some people coming, having good experiences, and then it's spreading. So, so the bottom line is there's not a high school out there that a school is going to think, oh, I'm not going to like this kid because they're at that school.
Right.
I mean, even if it's a school that for some reason you haven't had the best experience with, let's say, whatever, say people were rude to you and you're there, you're still professional enough to evaluate that applicant in their own context for who they are, and not hold it against the kid that the receptionist was rude or something.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So there's no school like that. And you have to be very, very careful with not seeing a pattern of success and thinking you're dead on arrival, or, woe is me, I don't have a chance because I don't see a history of success.
Yeah.
If anything, that can be an opportunity. It's what I say all the time. Colleges want what they don't have, and they love getting new feeders.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything else on this one, Hillary?
I think that's it.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Susan, we have another question that we've privately been saying how much we love. It's from Mary right here from Atlanta. It's
Yeah.
about student housing. So I'm going to play the question. I'd love your thoughts.
Hi, Mark. This is Mary from Atlanta, and I have a question about student housing. I've heard from other parents and in the media that there is a shortage of on campus housing at many colleges. This includes several schools on my students' college list. I've been hearing about students being housed in hotels or even temporary structures, students being asked to pay housing deposits before they've even received an acceptance letter, and students being offered money to live off campus. Just this week, a coworker of mine dropped her 18-year-old off at college only to find she'd been assigned a 23-year-old resident assistant as a roommate. And while many schools seem to guarantee housing for freshmen, upperclassmen are forced to find off-campus housing, which is not necessarily easy or affordable. Given how much effort we're making to find a school that is a good fit for our student, and given how much we will be spending on college, it seems reasonable to expect decent housing. Some people may feel that housing is only a small part of the whole experience, but I'm not sure I agree. What tips can you give us so that we can make informed decisions about student housing?
Right in your hometown, Mark, there in
Yes.
Atlanta. And this is really interesting, Mary, because we don't get asked about things like this as often. My experience, both in admissions and as a college counselor in a school, was that colleges were pretty upfront about who they guaranteed housing for. What they were less upfront about was how they assigned it. And what I learned over the years is that there were certain schools, I'll use NYU as an example, where housing was assigned based on the date of your enrollment deposit. So in the case of a university where dorms are not necessarily centralized around the campus, where there may be dorms all over the place, as in, kind of Manhattan, that some students were finding that they didn't have a first year dorm assignment near the main campus. So, in my mind, I was always like, well, how did you not know this? Did you not read the website? Did you not talk to admission counselor? And I think as colleges started having more trouble coming in right on their enrollment target, there had been periods of time where a college's yield might go up even just 1 or 2%. And if that means a couple hundred extra first year students, I remember when Tufts in Boston literally rented the proverbial hotel on the edge of campus just to accommodate, the freshman class. And, the CFO laughs all the way to the bank on that one, but no one else is laughing because of the quality of life issues. So I think, the best that a family can do is be very inquisitive about housing, see what's in print, talk to admissions counselors, even talk to the housing office, put in an email or make a cold call to the housing office at a college that, your child is really interested in, and say, listen, this has got to factor into our experience. What's rumor and what's true? What's the intel on how we position, our student to get first year campus housing that is central to the campus and not, like the kind of nightmare stories that you were explaining, and find out how it's assigned. Do they line up all the ED or EA kids first who pay their deposits? And then what about the students who don't pay their deposit until May 1st? And is there a separate housing reservation process that is completely different from the admissions process? That's been a big problem, especially at public universities. Mark, what do you think?
I think this is a really, really, really important question. I really appreciate it because, obviously where you live is important. And I, too, am hearing a lot of nightmare type scenarios and situations out there. They tend to occur in areas that the school is either landlocked or the cost of housing is so high. And for example, there have been a lot of problems with the University of Miami recently, and South Florida real estate's just going through the roof. Somebody that I was working with Linda last year, literally changed their early decision from the University of Miami to BC over this. As they
Wow.
explored more and more and more, they realized they didn't know what they were getting into from a housing standpoint. And sometimes they build new places, but they can be further away from where you want. Also, I just came back from 20 visits in California. This was a definite conversation there at places like Santa Barbara and UC Irvine. A lot of those schools will guarantee housing for 1 or 2 years. They don't mandate it, but they'll guarantee it. And they're clear about this. You have to listen. You better not miss that deadline by 1 day, because
That's
it's
right.
guaranteed as long as you meet that deadline. This is a place where you really need to follow deadlines. Now, friends, there's an article we probably should have had as one of our in the news discussions. And it ran back in 2022, and it was entitled Housing Shortage, Soaring Rents, Squeeze U.S. College Students. It's an AP News article, if you want to look it up, by Janie, Janie Har, Har. And it ran on April 26, 2022. So the article talks about the housing crisis at UC Berkeley and at UNC Chapel Hill, at the University of Tampa, at Tennessee Knoxville, and Arizona State. Here's a quote from the article. Nationally, 43% of students at four-year universities are experiencing housing insecurity in 2020, and that is up from 35% in 2019. And that's according to an annual survey conducted by the Hope Center for College Community and Justice at Temple University. So the article talks about how students are reporting being unable to pay their utilities, rent, or mortgage, especially like off-campus students living in the area. Talks about how they're living in overcrowded units or moving in with others due to financial difficulties. And the article says that there have been rent increases at apartments in Chapel Hill of 24%, 31% at Arizona State, 36% at in Knoxville, and it also talks about challenges at University of Tampa. Now, this is mostly in regard to off-campus apartments, just because of the growth in these areas has exceeded their construction of new houses being built and new apartments being built. And so you see this in places where the cost is just booming and in real estate is expensive around, and therefore it's hard for schools to provide it. I'm really glad you said talk to Residential Life, Susan, because I think it's very important that you talk to Residential Life and you ask the tough questions. I also recommend you talk to a wide range of different students about their experience, as well. But I'm seeing this, of course, this tends to be colleges that are in demand, and they're either real estate is really expensive or difficult to get. Look at Northeastern. Right? Northeastern has started this whole NU Bound program, go off to Mills College in Oakland or go overseas. And then when you come back as a transfer student, there's not a guarantee of housing at Northeastern. So I think it's also something where you should look at data. Look at if it's important to you, look at the percentage of freshmen that live on campus. Is it mandatory? Is it mandatory in some places, if you want a real community feel, the Connecticut colleges, the Davidsons, the Redlands, where they have 4-year on-campus requirements, unless maybe you're coming from like 20 miles away or something. If that's really, really important, very few schools have that, but there's some that do if that's important to you. If it's not important, but you want the guarantee, is the guarantee there for 2 years, for 3 years? What kind of housing? 2 years ago, I had a nightmare with the University of Tampa.
Oh, no.
Absolute
That's right.
nightmare.
I remember that.
Oh, it was terrible. In fact, I had 2 parents say, have anybody talk to me before they have their student go there. And I followed up. And in one case, the student was happy as a clam after a while. The parent wasn't, but the kid was. But Tampa literally, the week when people were moving in, said we don't have room. And then they had kids manning the phone.
Oh boy.
So it was just absolutely terrible. So I do think this is something that is important, and I think it's worth looking into. And I think, I would absolutely be talking with Res Life, and I would be asking the hard questions. If you want to know if there's a guarantee, what's the guarantee? Do I need to apply by such and such a date? What's the off-housing campus situation like? And what's the cost? Miami's costs have just gone through the roof. Some of it is really, really wealthy families from places like Connecticut and New York moving down there to get away with the salt taxes and that. But some of it is also all of the hurricanes have blown up insurance and blown up property tax. So it's so high that, I haven't checked, but Miami has an option for a brand new dorm that's like $29,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's insane, like the costs. So these are all things that people need to look into. Now, you won't find it as much in places where, you don't have that housing demand, but in major metro areas or in places that are landlocked. I remember Santa Barbara, they said, we don't have room for one more person. So sometimes when things are really tight, they're almost looking for ways to get people off. So, yeah.
And incentivizing them.
Correct. And so, yeah, I would definitely ask the hard questions, and I feel residential life is in general better than admissions.
Well, admissions is going to spin whatever, the response is, not in a dishonest way, but because also they can't predict. Generally colleges don't plan on over enrolling.
Uh-huh.
They really don't. In fact, that was a big shift in the profession, even a decade or 20 years ago, where it was an embarrassment if a college had to go to its waiting list. It meant they weren't popular enough, which was just kind of a dumb mindset. But when over-enrollment started becoming a bigger problem because yield became less predictable for all colleges started trying to come in a little below their target number of first-year students so that they could fill from the waiting list where there were outstanding students who would be thrilled to come and bring right up to the campus, the class size that they were looking for, especially if housing was guaranteed. So the mindset has really changed, which is why you see some colleges dropping the number, their upfront offers of admission, but then very quickly now going to the waiting list. It used to be no one went to the waiting list until well after May 1st. But now, because colleges are, planning and hoping to have a certain number of spaces available so they can come in exactly where they want to be in terms of housing, they go to the waiting list in late April, mid to late, ridiculously early, but that's okay. It serves kids well, but there's been a real sea change in that regard. I think a good question too for a prospective family is to say, what happens? Like, what happens if you run out of housing? What's the plan? And know what their plan B is so that you can see if the college is being thoughtful about the plan B for housing.
And another thing that's really important, and we haven't really talked about it much, if all, on this podcast, Susan, is most students don't live on campus as upperclassmen at most schools. The majority of schools, most students are obviously 4-year residential liberal arts, those are different, but that's not schools.
Yeah.
So most students are off campus, certainly for their upper class years. So if they're going to be off campus, there's certain things you want to know. You want to know cost. You want to know quality. You want to know distance from campus, especially for people that may not be planning on having a car. What is this like without a car? How far away is it from campus? What are the conditions of the housing? What are the costs of the housing? What's the availability of the housing?
And a big one, Mark, is what's going to happen to your financial aid award. If you move off campus, how is the college going to adjust your aid award? Because I think that's a really big one.
Yeah, and normally with that, what you want to see is what are their projected numbers that they have built in, because they usually do research of the cost in the area and they come up with a figure. And so you want to look at, is that affordable? What the figure that they're going to give, what can you actually get for that? So yeah, so these are really important questions. And there are things, I mean, I'm thinking out loud even as I'm talking, Susan. I need to be telling my families, this is for especially for schools that you're real serious about. Maybe you're going back to 2 or 3 admitted student visit programs. This should be something that you incorporate into part of your research. Because I think what happens is people are just in the immediacy of the moment, and
That's
a
right.
lot of schools do guaranteed housing for freshmen, and that's kind of all people are thinking of. But and not everybody does that, but certainly a lot of schools do. They see the value. A lot of colleges will tell you, and a lot of times they'll even say this on their info sessions. They have the research that shows students have higher GPAs and they're more engaged if they're on campus initially when they're first orienting to the school. And I would argue, because both of my kids actually did 2 years on, 2 years off. Karis, it was very unique because Davidson has a 4-year requirement.
That's right.
But when she went overseas in fall of her junior, I guess she did a year and a half. When she went overseas, fall of her junior year, they ended up over enrolling those spots, and then gave an option of like converting, like a room into a dorm room. And they're like, no, I don't think so. And like in a lot of places, it varies. You can get really, really nice digs off campus, especially if you go in with 3 or 4 people and you split. There are a lot of places where you can actually save money.
Oh, absolutely.
You can save money. And I always said, and I said this to my kids, and I said this to all the students I work with, if you're not going to be on campus, be really close to campus. It's not, to me, it's not so much about on and off. Although I see great value to being on, especially during your first and even your second year when you're getting, you're really getting oriented to the school and learning about your support systems. But if you're like within walking distance or close, because the problem is if you don't have that, the chances are you're not going to go to a study group or a study hall or something that you're just going to, you're just going to have that disconnect. And you won't sort of be plugged into all of the supports of the culture of the school. And it might be even something like a great lecturer that you want to go hear. And if it's going to be 15 to 20 minutes fighting traffic versus something that you can get to in 3 or 4 minutes. So I know, hopefully this was helpful, Mary. What a great question.
Excellent.
And thank you so much for asking it. Thanks, Susan. This is fun as always.
Always, Mark.
All right. We'll see you next time.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, thrilled to have Gloria and Terry Crawford back after a little more than a year and a half since they were here the last time. But boy, has a lot changed since they were here the last time. And we're going to talk about it today. So in part 1, Terry and Gloria share the history of Glimpse video. Gloria shares why they changed the name from Elevator Pitch to Glimpse. Terry gives an overview of Glimpse video, and he shares the need that Glimpse video meets in the marketplace. Then Gloria adds some additional reasons why Glimpse is valuable to college admissions reps. Gloria shares how a student can avoid feeling a lot of pressure, like their admissions offer depends on their Glimpse video. Terry shares some of the safety guards built into Glimpse to take the pressure off of students. Listen and enjoy. Friends, Terry and Gloria Crawford are back from Initial View. Hi, Terry. Hi, Gloria. How are you?
Hi.
Hello. Woohoo. We're doing good.
So great to be
we're
back.
hanging in there.
Atlanta's proud. We get to claim Gloria and Terry as our own. They're residents from the metro area. But a lot has happened in the last 20 months or so since you were on. Like, you guys have just absolutely blown up. Now, I remember, they treated me to a nice Thai restaurant, by the way. Thank you. But we were meeting over lunch, and you guys were having like a big meeting coming up, a bunch of schools in New York. And
That's
I
right.
think
Yeah.
that was
That's right.
the talk about maybe launching a Glimpse, if I remember, or like have it, because you were saying you're having a big meeting, a whole bunch of schools. You mentioned a whole bunch of the names, a lot of sort of the movers and shakers were all going to be there. And you were saying there was talk of hey, nobody really wants everybody to have to do their own video.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
makes so much more sense to kind of have a platform. So tell me about that. Like, did that really merge and morph into what what we have today? Like, tell us about it. Cause so
Yeah,
much feels like it, just so you know, I've gotten 5 glimpse questions in the last week.
great. Great. Well, we're here. I mean, now is the time to ask questions. So we're
Yeah.
certainly here to answer that, and we can go into all the details of the operations on behind the scenes. But that meeting in New York
Yeah.
was absolutely a critical piece of Glimpse taking off. And what is interesting to anyone who's kind of interested in how things get done in higher ed, it is very important to get kind of decision makers together in a room, and that you kind of that when that happens, interesting ideas come up, and people think like, oh yeah, I could do this maybe with this little tweak here, and colleges always feel better if they see other peer schools that are doing something with them, and that is how it happened. So we all met in New York, and that was over a day plus, and we had a nice dinner as part of that too. And oftentimes it's these informal conversations that lead to really interesting things happening, and out of that, the Duke was kind of a marquee adopter of this the previous cycle,
Yeah.
and other colleges are definitely looking, and other schools are adopting as well. But really a lot of gratitude to Dean Gutentag, who gave us lots of advice on how to think about this. One of them being, Glimpse is a good name. We had originally called it elevator pitch, and that he
Yeah.
was
On our
right.
podcast, it was elevator
Yeah,
pitch.
Yeah.
that's right.
Uh,
That's what I was going to say last time we were on with you, Mark. We were
Yes.
talking about elevator pitch, and one of the things that Christoph had mentioned to us
Hmm.
is, I love what you're all doing here. I believe in the philosophy. I think this could be great, but would you consider changing the name? And that is when we kind of brainstormed, and all along I think I had been describing this as giving admissions officers a glimpse of who you are, and so we kind of workshopped a bunch of names, but glimpse is the one that stuck.
I think it's a fantastic name. I'm sure you feel like, and the names are important, right? Like they cast a vision. And I think Laura, you might have even used that language when on our podcast when describing elevator pitch.
Yeah, we learned a lot from that first round of elevator pitches before that big meeting in March, about how students were approaching kind of this video option. And I think elevator pitch sounded a little bit corporate, and a lot of students were kind of coming on and trying to tell their whole life story in 90 seconds. And what we all kind of realized is this is part of an application process. It is not the application. And so admissions officers have a whole host of other information, so you don't need to kind of use that 90 seconds and reiterate all of the things that you already have in your application. So
Mhm.
us changing the name was a big effort of helping students understand you don't have to tell your whole life story in 90 seconds, and you don't necessarily even need to do it the same way that we would say in a business school class how to do an elevator pitch. It's slightly different than what that is.
Yeah, I think the other connotation pitch has is a little bit of inauthenticity.
yeah, you're kind of selling yourself on Shark Tank
Yes.
or something like
Yes.
that, and that's not what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And colleges like are so much value authenticity so much. Like glimpse just it has no connotation of inauthenticity at all, right? It's yeah. So right away, was there a moment when that word popped in and like you kind of just knew this is it? Because I definitely think that was a great choice.
I think I had used it so much in how I was describing it when I was talking to both admissions officers and counselors. And so that was actually the first one that came to my mind. I had to bring the rest of the team kind of along to my side. At first, they were like, if you say glimpse too many times, it starts to not sound like a word. But
That's just being too deep in it.
yeah, we got kind of in the weeds as we
Yeah.
often do in any kind of startup or business. But again, I think that word just encapsulated it so well. Plus, it's just something that is easy to kind of brand. I've been loving it. I am involved in kind of the quality control of this product right now. And so I get to hear a lot and see a lot of these videos come through. And I excitedly slacked the whole team and said, people are saying in their video, and this is my glimpse. And I think that's amazing that the proper noun of this is my glimpse has started. It's become a thing, and it makes so much sense. I think the kids, it's intuitive to them. And so, you know, a lot of our naming actually has been somewhat serendipitous and providential. So I'm just grateful that that name kind of came to be.
What I'd love you guys to do is to just kind of start from the basics, because it just dawned on me that one, not everybody will have heard you the first time. And I don't want to assume that every one of our listeners knows what Glimpse is.
Sure.
I've been talking, most of them will, but they also still probably have superficial knowledge.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things I think that would be helpful to probably start with is, what was the reason for the product, right? So I know you and I talked about, when we met before, the rise of AI and concerns about that. We have, I can think of a lot of things. Colleges moving away from just the labor intensive aspect of interviewing, and this shouldn't be a substitute for an interview. Certainly just, and Christoph's been a leader on, speaking of I'm interviewing him coming up, by the way. I'm going to ask him for his views on Glimpse from an admission director as well. But
no, he's the person to ask.
Yeah, but another thing that he's been really outspoken on is, and he should be, just everybody's hands are all over the essays.
Yep.
So are we really getting student work? So those are some thoughts I have, affirmative action decision. There are a lot of different factors I know that play a role in people wanting to get a better sense of a kid. But why don't you talk a little bit about sort of what need are you meeting in the marketplace that you're hearing from admissions people, and then just describe the product a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say, so Glimpse, it's a chance for a student on our platform to record a 60 to 90-second video, and then once they've recorded that video, they can send it to any college that they're applying to. So it's very easy to use. Can be done on a browser base. It's also, they can do it on their cell phone. For colleges for many years have understood that, look, at some point video is going to be a part of the application process. It's just, what is the right way to design it so that it works, broadly, within the application. One of the main reasons, and when you talk to Christoph, you can also mention this to him, but is that, because of ChatGPT, and Gloria and I, we have kids in high school. I mean, it's pervasive. Like, ChatGPT's influence is pervasive. And the application is no exception. And so there just being a feeling on the admission side, and this is not always made explicit. It's only, maybe leaders like Christoph or, Rick Clark that will kind of talk explicitly about this, that they really are seeing, essays in many cases lose some of the value that they used to have. And, we're a piece, we're a part of that. That allows them to get a more authentic look at the applicant, because it is the student that is talking and making a decision about what they're presenting when they're using Glimpse. And so that's maybe the number one driver if you want to kind of prioritize how they're looking at this. But the question about interviews is also in particular kind of alumni interviews and the challenges with administering that. Lots of challenges around alumni interviews. We have colleges of many different types that use us. Some have interviews and they say, hey, we have an interview, but we might not have spots for everyone. But we would also gladly accept your Glimpse. There are some that say, we don't do interviews, but we do recommend that you go and do a Glimpse. So Glimpse can kind of exist alongside of whatever a college is doing already. And it does help address that. I mean, it does help address kind of, however, if they do see alumni interviews as challenging, and you can imagine all the challenges with kind of training and making sure that those interviews are effective and also helpful. in the admissions process. That's absolutely something that we're addressing as well. It is on some level, some schools have been using video, and that has been a little bit cumbersome or not super helpful, or maybe only really well-resourced kids have done it and under-resourced kids have not. That's another reason that they're looking at Glimpse and be like, oh, this is actually something which is much more accessible. It's easy for students to use, and yet it also levels the playing field in the sense that you can't go and do a lot of post-production or spend lots of time editing it. And it can be sent anywhere. So it's kind of, you're one and done. It's not something everyone's sensitive about adding new things into the process. And so it's something that gives students that want to use it a chance to add a little something to their application. And of course, then they can just send it everywhere and then kind of use it throughout the process. Maybe they use it for their ED school, but then, ED might not go their way, and then they can keep using it, as they're applying. So those are all the reasons that it's taken off. Like I said, Duke was kind of the marquee adopter initially, and we had some other schools that were using it too, and that was incredibly helpful and grateful as we were growing then. But then really it was this cycle now is when a large number of selective private universities have put it on their website, that kind of being the one milestone. But we even have some flagship publics that are using it, lots of liberal arts schools that are using it, and varying degrees of selectivity. And so it's all it seems like it's helpful for multiple types of universities and colleges. And what's most exciting is that, students, I think, are really taking advantage of it, and they're seeing as an opportunity to add a little bit of a different aspect of their application, just a glimpse into who they are. So those are the reasons why, we think colleges are really leaning into it right now. And we've probably over the past 2 years had about 10,000 kids use it. I say kids very endearingly. We have our own kids applying, so I think we can say kids.
I call them kids, so kids.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that.
Students sound so formal to say students all the time.
Yeah. They're certainly adult adjacent, and I don't want to take that away from them. But they
young adult.
We say that very endearingly. We did have Questbridge, which is a very unique organization in higher ed that provides access.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, no, that was a big milestone for us as well, and so that's been a big part of kind of the growth, and we'll have tens of thousands of kids do it this cycle, and we're prepared for that.
Can I just add something with the application process for anything else other than applying for colleges? You eventually meet someone, right? And I think that all along my own thought about having video in this application is just purely wanting to meet the student. I think any admissions officer goes into the business because they care about students, right? Like they care about the processes as well, and there are administrative reasons to be an admissions officer, but at the heart of it, you're looking to build a class, you're looking to build a community, and you want to meet people. And there are things in the process that make it where it can be more efficient. You've got lots of files you have to go through, whatnot. But at the end of the day, like we've heard many admissions officers say, like, oh, there are times when you have all these files and you're like, oh, if I could just meet them for 30 seconds, I could make a better decision. And our beginnings actually come from a comment like that from an admissions officer saying, gosh, if I could only meet this person for 30 seconds, I could make a better decision. For us thinking, admissions officers, they go to do school visits. They have info sessions. They have office hours where people can come and meet them. And they may not be something that is the reason why somebody's admitted, but it does sure make you more comfortable and make a human connection. So at the end of the day, this video, ChatGPT just was like wind in our sails, really. Like we were already talking about authenticity in this process and human connection in this process. And we were thinking, what is the best way to do that every student could access, not just the ones who could fly to a campus, not just the ones who have time in their schedule to schedule an alumni interview. I mean, some of the students that we got to have glimpse videos from are working 2 part-time jobs to support their families, and they are not able to get online at 6 p.m., 7 p.m. because they're making dinner for their families. And instead, they're getting online at midnight to record their glimpse. And but their voice is being heard. So I think there's some beauty in trying to kind of level the playing field a little bit, but maintain that human connection piece.
Yeah, and for those of you who never heard our last interview, so Gloria and Terry have founded a company called Initial View, and they've been actually doing videos for a while. It started at Georgia Tech, and they started working with a lot of international students, trying to get a sense. Part of it was integrity in the process to make sure somebody else wasn't, submitting an application different than the person showing up, right? So you kind of went
Yeah.
into that. And I know Rick and Georgia Tech continue to be one of the big supporters of what you're doing. So this is a hard question, Gloria. So, you mentioned admission officers say, gee, if I could only meet somebody, it would help me. How can somebody not hear that and feel like a lot of pressure, like, whoa, so much is riding on the line for me for this 60 to
Yeah.
90-second video? I just heard admission officers wish they could see somebody, and now Glimpse is their opportunity to see somebody. Like, pressure, pressure, pressure.
Yeah. Well, I would start with I have been asking a lot of admissions officers, like, what are you hoping to hear? What do you want to see? And at the end of the day, they will say things like, I just want them to be authentic. I just want to be able to imagine them on campus. I just want to them to think that they're sitting across the table from a curious adult that cares about them. And I think all of that makes it hopefully brings some of the pressure off, because it's not tell me your whole entire life story so that I can judge you. It is more about, I just want to connect with you. I want to see what you care about, what your personality is like. It's not meant to be the whole application. It is meant to just be a glimpse. And your application, while it has a lot of information, is actually limited. It doesn't exude kind of your warmth and your empathy and your kindness and your curiosity. It doesn't exude that so clearly, so evidently. I mean, you can
Or just
craft
even a
that.
little bit of a sense of your personality.
Right. I think at the end of the day, I mean, one of the comments that at this New York meeting that was made was, on move-in day, everybody sounds 17 and 18. It's like a burst of energy on the campus, and we love it. And we have lost that in the application process. When we are reading applications, we're rarely feeling that energy from that 17 to 18-year-old. We're actually hearing very polished adults. and I will say that sometimes our students are able to sound like adults and are able to write really polished things, but more often than not, they are still 17 and 18. And that is what a college is hoping for. They want that kind of, that freshness, right? that
Mm-hmm.
curiosity, that potential. Like, they don't want, we're done and we can't educate you at all. They want somebody who is ready to come in to learn and ready to come in to contribute and ready to be 17 and 18. So I think that is something that I hope will come out in these videos that doesn't necessarily come out in those essays or even supplements.
And there are a couple of things too, just to talk about the nuts and bolts of the design that we think maybe lowers the temperature when it comes to the stress that could be around this. I mean, one is that a student, they can practice as long as they want to. I mean, they can do it once, and if they don't like it, they can re-record. So it's not high pressure as they're recording this. They can also send it to their counselor to get input from their counselor as well. And oftentimes the response back from a counselor is like, this looks good. This is who you are, and this is another way you can present yourself, and it's memorable. So there are some, and of course, then the student can of course send it to multiple schools at once. So just from a time commitment standpoint, it's going to look very different than even having to go do an interview in a coffee shop. It's something that students should be thoughtful about it, and they should of course consider what they say, as they should with any part of the application. But there is some thought put into the design that hopefully makes it a reasonable task that students are doing. It's one that we think is of course of great value too, because going forward, as we all know, thanks to COVID and post-COVID and everyone doing things online and Zoom, when they interview for their internship or their job, that will be almost certainly done online. And so kind of the ability to start thinking, how do I present myself in a way that is going to be compelling to an adult is a very important exercise for their life. It's how well you do on a standardized test. Well, that does matter for college admissions. It's not really going to impact what you're doing later on. Whereas this is something that is truly a life skill that all kids and anything that we create, we can first ask the question: is this something we want our own kids to do? It can be seen as very important for them, and something which is really, I think, makes the college application process something that is worth doing in and of itself. And many things are not like that in the college application process. Many things are like, this is just another hoop we gotta jump over. Whereas this is something that's actually reflective and can be something which is almost a little bit of a milestone. And as a student reflects on what they want to share.
Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with Gloria and Terry Crawford on Klimp's Video. Hope you'll join us next week for the next segment.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, I really think you're going to enjoy my interview with Fabrizio Delosio. We really spend most of our time looking at how in the world did the University of Tennessee, Knoxville go from 17,000 applicants to just a couple under 60,000 in 7 years. So it's a 5-part interview, and we spend the first 3 parts really doing a deep dive into that. And then the last 2 parts, we just really look at the university itself. So in part 1, Fabrizio explains his backstory, including why he chose to come to work at the University of Tennessee. I explain what Fabrizio said to me on my visit there that made me want him to come on the podcast. Fabrizio explains the importance of the 3 Ps, and he tells us what the 3 Ps are. Fabrizio talks about what the regional recruiter does, and he explains how UTK used regionals very effectively to penetrate different markets. I asked Fabrizio a question that has always confounded me about why some admission officers are cynical about the value of regional admission officers. Fabrizio talks about why it takes 3 years before you really see the fruit from your labor from using regionals to penetrate markets. Fabrizio talks about whether they plan on adding more regionals, scaling back on the regionals, or staying the same. Listen and enjoy. Friends, you are in for a treat today. I am thrilled to introduce you to Fabrizio Delosio. And you are, I always get these titles wrong, Dean of Admission, Director of Admission. What's the title these days, Fabrizio?
Yeah, my title's almost as long as my name. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Enrollment and the Executive Director of Undergraduate Admissions.
Oh, man, I slighted you. That's above the Dean and Director. So we're thrilled to have Fabrizio. I'll tell you a little backstory in a second of kind of how we met. But why don't you start by giving us your background, because you've got a really interesting background.
Sure. Well, first, Mark, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm super
my
excited
pleasure
to be here. Yeah, so I'm a regular guy. I actually came to higher education because my mom told me I needed to go to college. Like it was instilled in me in a very young age. Both my parents immigrated to the United States from Italy, so I'm first gen, and I'm not sure if she knew what college was, but she knew that in her mind, that's what you needed to have a great life and to be able to provide for yourself and your family. So, I was fortunate. There's lots of families, right, where there isn't an understanding of college. And for that reason, parents don't necessarily promote it because they don't know it. My mom was very much the opposite. She said, this is what you got to do if you want to have a great life. And so I look back at my time as a kid growing up, and I'm like, I am so happy to have had a parent that felt that way and that pushed me in that direction. And that's what got me to stay in this business, if you will, right? There's lots of jobs out there where you can do really well and make a lot of money. There's not that many jobs where you can have an impact, like the impact that we have in education. And so I see my job as helping transform students. And so I've been in this work connected to education ever since I graduated from college, all the way to today in terms of what I'm doing now.
Fabrizio, walk us through the different stops you've had, because I know, talking to you on my visit to UTK, I was fascinated by that. I think our listeners will find that interesting,
Sure.
including the stop at the College Board. Let's walk us through your history.
Yeah, so I graduated from a small public school in New York State, got my master's degree while I was working in undergraduate admissions. It was a grad assistantship. And I worked there as an admissions counselor, as an assistant director. And then after a few years, I wanted to try something a little different, but I didn't want to leave education. So I worked for a company that built CRM systems for higher education. I did that for a few years, moved to Atlanta.
Yay.
And that organization was acquired by College Board. And then I worked at College Board for another 14 years. I left College Board in 2017. Had a great experience there. But after all that time, I felt like I needed something different. I managed our higher ed consulting and services division for higher education institutions. And so we talked to them about licensing search names and how to use the SAT and the best way to recruit students and financial aid and all that great stuff. So the consulting was awesome. I was actually an account manager consulting, but then I managed the division I think for 5 years at the end there, and established a great team, built amazing relationships with colleagues across the country. But I was missing the contact with the student, and I wasn't seeing the fruits of the labor, right? Because as you know, when you're a consultant, you can recommend anything you want, but whether the client decides to do that or not, that's up to them. And if they do it, I don't get to benefit from seeing the impact of that. And so I wanted to get on a campus and do some of the things that I've been recommending schools do for a long time. And so I looked at lots of schools, amazing institutions, and I looked at the schools that folks call like the top 5%, and I thought, you know what? How much of an impact am I going to have there?
Mm-hmm.
But at a place like University of Tennessee, I saw a huge opportunity to take what was already happening at a high level and do it at a higher level and get the word out. And I've been here ever since summer of 17, and I haven't looked back.
Wow, that's fascinating. Apparently you learned some things at College Board, because our regular listeners know this because they follow along. We've been talking on this podcast for some time now about the growth of Tennessee and the applicant pool, because it's not just myself. There's 7 co-hosts, and we're experiencing it in the counseling room. Way more people are asking us about Tennessee. In fact, I was just talking to a family that I'm working with in Newport Beach, California, and they said, "Are you going to put Tennessee on our kids list?" Because they, a friend of theirs is having a great experience at your school. So anyway, so there's that background. Now, our regular listeners know I went on a tour called the Sweet Tea Tour. It's put on by SACAC, 10 schools in Tennessee, June of 2023. And I came back after that tour and said, there are a few schools I need to talk about. to you guys. One is Belmont and one is UTK. And so we had Chris Cage on from Belmont a while ago. You guys know that. And Fabrizio committed to come on back then. It's just these things take time to nail a date and a time down. And one of the reasons I wanted to have Fabrizio on is because right away, as soon as we got to UTK, which, by the way, is just University of Tennessee at Knoxville, just differentiating it from some of the other satellite locations, like Chattanooga, for example, UTC. But they had a breakfast for us right away. It was like overlooking the football stadium. And I was curious about this question right then. So, Fabrizio came around, he's greeting all of us. And I was like, I have to ask you a question. You guys have exploded. And just so you know, those numbers, listeners, are in the last 7 years, basically since you've got there, Fabrizio, you guys have gone from 17,000 apps to just a shade a couple under 60,000. And I asked him right then, how did this happen? And I absolutely loved his answer. And do you remember? Because I said right then and there, I want you to come on the podcast and share that with our listeners. Remember that?
I do remember.
So that's what I want you to do today. So take some time and answer that question. How did it happen? What did you do? Because everybody's asking me about it. Everybody's, asking me what's going on with Tennessee. And I'd say, in general, the Southeast, right? There's been some explosion at Clemson and some other places as well. But I think it's probably most pronounced with you. So talk to us.
You bet. Yeah. And it kind of goes back to that time when I've interviewed and I said, I'm going to come to Tennessee because I want to have an impact. I saw everything that's going on at this university back then. And I felt like there's something wrong, right? Like, meaning why aren't there more students? Why is our admit rate so high? Why don't we have more applicants, right? Like, this should be a destination university. And so, I spent some time kind of learning the university, not too much time, but a little time learning the university, talking to our staff, talking to students, talking to counselors, right? Like, and I came out of that with basically the understanding and the belief that people don't know UT. And people that think they know UT really don't know UT. And so, we're a special place. And I know lots of schools are special, and I get that. But we have a flavor that's, I think, very different. And so I like to talk about people, place, and programs. The people at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, East Tennessee, very welcoming, very friendly. We're the volunteers, right? And so if you're, the meaning of a volunteer for your listeners as it relates to the University of Tennessee is really someone that makes a place better as a result of being there. Someone that believes in servant leadership, someone that wants to have an impact in their community. And you can define community as church, home, school, however you want to define it. But that's the kind of student we attract being the Tennessee Volunteers. And so the people here are just phenomenal. And we all know people make a place. And then when you think about place, Knoxville is a medium-sized city with the arts, with restaurants, with fun things to do. We're 40 minutes from the Smoky Mountains. We're on right here on the river, the Tennessee River. It's a great place for a student to learn about themselves and to have an amazing experience. And then the programs. We have over 280 programs of study, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in this podcast. But it was getting the word out. And I think that's where we focus. And so we invested heavily into a regional recruitment model. So we had a few regional recruiters before, but we wanted to make sure that we were accessible across the state, because we have regional recruiters across the state, but across the country. And they helped us get the word out. And it also created that people piece, right? Like the great people.
Hey, Fabrizio, let me stop you there because I want to unpack that.
Sure.
These are regional recruiters that live, that are stationed in the city that they're working in. They're working that market. And I remember talking with you about this on my visit because you really felt this was one of the real keys. And you felt like it started slow, but when you hit year 3, that's when things really took off. So why don't you just tell our listeners what the regional recruiter does?
Yeah. Man, you remembered all that, huh?
Yeah, I did.
Because that's exactly what I say. Yeah.
You sure did.
So the regional recruiter, again, whether they're in state or in a market out of state, they cover and manage a territory, and they're there to build relationships with student counselors, build relationships with students, and as a result of those student relationships, building relationships with parents. And they're the portal to the university. They're the one that is there to help answer the questions. They're the one that's there to come do a college night or do a workshop at a high school for a school. They're the one that is disseminating the information to those students. And they have the benefit of knowing the schools, right? They know the communities. And so they can help put the context, they can help describe UT and share information about UT in the context for that school. And so I think that is hugely important, because we could have hired a lot of staff here in Knoxville, but there wouldn't be that connection that I think our regional recruiters provide us.
So here's the question I have about that, because, and I have a background, admissions and sales background. When I first, heard the concept of the regional recruiter, it immediately made sense to me. It's like immediately, and of course I experienced them when I was on the school side here. I would meet with one, UAB's got one, you'll meet with them and they'll present. Alabama's kind of made this model famous a little bit, especially in the Southeast, right? And, you'll see them, they'll present in front of students and say, hey, if I missed something, meet me again at a Starbucks, or I'll come out and do your back to school night. And, I'm looking at this, and I've gone to presentations at NACAC the last couple of years, and I've seen a lot of times how much people are paid, and, it's not a lot of money, right? And I'm thinking, okay, throw in benefits and expenses. And it's never made sense to me how, if you have somebody just working a market like that, and you hire someone who's got good people skills, passion for the job, builds a relationship well, that person should, whatever the number is, should easily be able to bring you 15, 20 students, and then I look at what you're paying them, and it just makes so much sense. But a lot of times when I talk to schools about this, they'll say things like, yeah, but it's really complicated. You got to deal with all these different taxes and different rules in different states, or we're moving away from it. Why have more schools not gone to this model? Because to me, when I look at what you pay somebody versus the productivity of what they should be able to do, not just in students, but just getting your name awareness out there that can reverberate for years and years and years, if not decades. Why is this model kind of, poo-pooed a little bit sometimes when I talk to people about it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think the tax implications.
So that is a big deal then. Yeah.
If you look at California, there's certain salary levels. If they're exempt staff, you have to pay, which, and then the cost of living adjustments, because we give cost of living adjustments. So those are all things that I get it. It's not easy, but let's face it, right? The work we do isn't easy. And if we really want to have an impact, we're going to have to think outside the box. And I feel like this model allowed us specifically, right? I can't speak for other schools.
Sure.
Allowed us to really enhance our growth. And then also I'm going to mention this later. Also, we talk about the volunteer experience, right? We want someone to be engaged, to be excited about this university. We want them to understand what it means to be a volunteer. It's a lot easier to do that in person, talking with a family at Starbucks, like you mentioned, Mark, or at a school visit, and being able to cover the territory. And then counselors feel better supported, right? And we know counselors, I'm going to say influencers, but they're much more than influencers in this process, right? So yeah, it's worked out really well. We had data. We had a handful or so before I even got here, and the return on investment, to use a business-like term, the ROI after 3 years of being in the market was significant.
I felt it had to be. And is it 3 years because that's how long it takes for the person to establish relationships? You say, hey, I'll do your back to school night, and you do the PowerPoint at the this and that, the other. And is it, how much is it the person building relationships more plus them just refining their skill set? Why is it year 3 as opposed to year 5 or year 1 or 2?
I think it's the things you just described. And I also think once we start getting that pipeline, right? So you get 10 students from a school when before we only got 1 or 2.
Right.
They come here to Knoxville. They have an amazing volunteer experience. They go back. They tell their friends. They tell their parents. Their parents go to a holiday party and they're telling their friends. And then they're telling the counselor. And right. So then after a few cycles of that, like it starts to pay dividends, right? And now I call that a pipeline. Now you've got a pipeline. And it's really important that we maintain those pipelines and that students that are going back to their schools or their communities or their families are really happy with their experience, because that's the best advertisement a university could get. And honestly, that's what we should be doing. Like we should all be providing an amazing experience for students.
So where do you see yourself going with it? Do you feel like, it's kind of reached its peak now, we want to scale it down or we want to level off? Or do you feel like, what, this is a proven model for us? Let's take a look at another market where we're not seeing as much applicant, flow as we'd like, and let's target that. Like, what are your plans to keep it where it's at, scale it back, or expand it?
Yeah, at the very least, keep it where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
We have no plans to
scale it back,
hire less or have less in the field. What we do is if a staff person in a regional market decides to move on, we'll reevaluate that market and we'll look at other markets to say, okay, is there someplace else that resource would be better leveraged? Just to be smart, right? Because we don't have infinite resources, so we want to be smart with the resources we have. And so, for example, in California, we have 2 regionals, right? Is that the right number for California? Or in the Chicagoland area, we have 1.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue maybe we need a second one in Chicagoland because it's in our top 5, right? And the volume is huge, because it's not just about getting them to apply, working with them through that, but it's also answering questions.
Sure.
After they've applied, it's being able to meet with families. And so if there's a huge interest from a market, we want to provide exceptional service to those students and to those families and to those counselors.
Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with Fabrizio Delosio. Hope you join us next week for the next segment. Okay, friends, on episode 484, Monday's episode, I'm going to share another excellent workshop from the NACAC conference, and I'm trying to pick between a couple, so you have to tune in Monday to see which one I pick. And then we'll have part 4 or 5 of David Hawkins from NACAC, and he's continuing to discuss their first ever survey they commissioned in 2023 to look at 1,000 high school students to see what their attitudes were toward the college admission process and college in general. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career success. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.